Have you ever wondered what happens when a man who has everything risks it all for a moment of passion? What happens when the ultimate fantasy trip turns into a life-shattering nightmare? A self-made millionaire, Julian Thorne, thought he had it all. To celebrate a massive deal, he whisks his mistress away to the exclusive private island of Musha Cay in the Bahamas. But paradise has a gatekeeper, and this one holds a jaw-dropping secret that will unravel his entire world. He was expecting a week of sun and sin. What he found was the ultimate betrayal, a shocking revelation, and the terrifying discovery that his perfect life was a meticulously crafted lie. At 38, he was the architect of a billion-dollar fintech empire, Prometheus Analytics, a company he had forged from nothing but code and caffeine in his cramped San Francisco apartment a decade ago. His life was a testament to his own brilliance, a carefully curated collection of successes. But mastery, he had recently decided, bred a certain kind of boredom. Ilara, with her quiet grace and her passion for historical art restoration, had become predictable. Their conversations revolved around charity galas, the color of the new nursery, as she was 4 months pregnant with their first child, and her seemingly endless family obligations. She was a gentle soul, a classic beauty from old money. But the fire, the hunger that drove Julian, seemed entirely foreign to her. Chloe was 27, a senior VP at Prometheus, and a mirror image of Julian's own ambition. Their affair had started 6 months ago, a spark in a late-night strategy session that had erupted into a wildfire. He was a titan, a conqueror. She didn't want to discuss nursery colors, she wanted to discuss hostile takeovers. Final confirmation, Mr. Thorne. We are on final approach to Musha Cay. She was breathtaking, dressed in a white linen jumpsuit that screamed effortless wealth, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sun streaming through the oval window. Ready for paradise, he murmured, his voice a low thrum of promise. Chloe leaned in, her scent, a heady mix of jasmine and success, filling his senses. With you, Julian, I was born ready. This trip was his magnum opus of deception. He'd even had his assistant create a detailed fake itinerary. The guilt was a dull, manageable ache, easily silenced by the roar of the private jet's engines and the thrill of transgression. For a moment, a flicker of shame had threatened to ignite, but he'd snuffed it out. They took what they wanted. The island emerged from the turquoise expanse of the Bahamian Sea like a jewel. Musha Cay, one of the most exclusive and expensive private islands in the world. He'd booked the entire resort, a collection of 5 sprawling villas, ensuring absolute privacy for a cool $250,000 for the week. It was an obscene amount of money, but he had just closed the Apex deal, a merger that would double Prometheus's valuation. This was his celebration, his reward. As the jet touched down on the private airstrip, a small fleet of electric golf carts driven by staff in crisp white uniforms zipped into position. The door hissed open, and the humid, salt-laced air flooded the cabin. Welcome, Mr. Thorne and Ms. Sterling, a man with a serene expression and impeccably tailored clothes said, bowing slightly. He looked to be in his late 50s, of Japanese descent, with a calm authority that commanded respect. I am Kenji Tanaka, the general manager of the resort. It is our distinct honor to have you as our guests. The honor is all ours, Kenji, Julian said, clapping him on the shoulder with the easy familiarity of a man used to being in charge. Lead the way, Julian said, taking Chloe's hand. Thatched roof villas were nestled into the landscape, connected by wooden walkways that snaked over crystalline lagoons. It was more than luxurious, it felt almost sacred, a sanctuary from the real world. But as they passed the main lodge, a grand open-air structure with a soaring cathedral ceiling, Julian felt a strange, jarring sense of dissonance. A scent wafted on the breeze, a delicate, familiar fragrance of white gardenias and sandalwood. It was Ilara's signature scent. For years, she'd had a custom perfume made by a small Parisian house. Then he saw a sculpture near the entrance to the lodge. He knew the artist, a niche avant-garde sculptor from Lisbon that Ilara had been championing for years. She owned 2 of his other works. Another coincidence. Is something wrong, darling? Chloe asked, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. No, not at all, he lied, forcing a smile. Just taking it all in. It's more than I expected. Mr. Tanaka, who was driving, glanced at him in the rearview mirror. The owner has a very particular and refined taste, he said, his voice smooth as silk. Every detail is curated to create a feeling of being home, even when you are a world away. Julian's unease deepened. He was a man who prided himself on control, on knowing every variable. But here, in this perfect paradise he had paid for, he felt a sudden, chilling premonition that he was not the one in charge at all. The Hibiscus Villa was a palace disguised as a beach house. It opened directly onto a secluded stretch of powdery white sand, its infinity pool bleeding seamlessly into the horizon of the azure sea. A personal chef and 2 butlers were assigned to them, their smiles warm but their eyes discreet. Chloe was ecstatic, her squeals of delight echoing through the vaulted ceilings as she explored the sprawling suite. She ran a bath in the outdoor stone tub, ordered champagne, and pulled Julian toward the 4-poster bed draped in white linen. The champagne, the sun, Chloe's eager body, it was the perfect antidote to the creeping anxiety. He was Julian Thorne. He was in control. The familiar scent, the sculpture, they were nothing. His mind, overstimulated and primed by guilt, was simply making connections where none existed. The next day, however, the strange coincidences began to pile up, each one a small stone dropped into the placid pool of his confidence. During breakfast on their private terracea feast of tropical fruits, lobster omelets, and pastries that seemed to materialize out of thin air, noticed the coffee. It was a specific single origin bean from a small estate in the Blue Mountains of Jamaica. He knew it because Ilara was the only person he'd ever met who drank it. She had a standing monthly order shipped directly from the estate, a finicky detail he'd always found slightly pretentious. When he asked the butler where it was from, the young man simply smiled and said, "It is the house blend, sir. A personal favorite of the owner." Later, as he and Chloe were lounging by the pool, a member of the staff brought him a selection of cigars. Nestled among the Cohibas and Monte Cristos was a box of Gurkha Black Dragon, an absurdly rare and expensive cigar. He had been given a box once by a Saudi prince after a successful deal. He had 2 left, which he kept in his humidor at home. She knew her luxury brands. "I thought those were impossible to get." "They are," Julian said slowly, picking one up. It felt heavy in his hand, like a stick of dynamite. He looked at the staff member. "Where did you get this?" "A gift from the management, sir. Mr. Tanaka was informed of your preferences and wanted to ensure your stay was exceptional." But Julian had never put this on his preference sheet. How could Tanaka possibly know about his private stash of Gurkha Black Dragons? Ilara. A cold dread began to seep into his bones, chilling him despite the sweltering Caribbean sun. She documented everything on her phone for her private collection, she assured him, posing by the pool, on the beach, and in their luxurious villa. Julian, however, was finding it increasingly difficult to imagine anything beyond the next 24 hours. He began to notice other things. The art in their villa, subtle watercolors of the Northern California coastline, looked remarkably like the style of a local artist Ilara patronized. The book collection on the shelf wasn't the usual generic resort fare. But the details were too specific, too personal. That evening, Mr. Tanaka approached them as they were having cocktails at the beach bar, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and violet. "Mr. Thorne, Miss Sterling," he said with his customary bow. "I hope the island is meeting your expectations." "It's exceeding them, Kenji," Chloe purred, sipping her Bellini. Julian decided to probe. "Tanaka, your attention to detail is remarkable. The coffee, the cigars. It's as if you know me." Kenji Tanaka's placid smile didn't waver. "Research? Discreet inquiries, of course. We cross-reference public profiles, business associates, social circles. It is our mission to personalize the experience. The owner insists upon it. The owner. This mysterious, omniscient figure whose taste mirrored his wife's and whose resources could unearth his most private preferences. Who the hell owned this place? He had booked it through a high-end, anonymous concierge service. For the first time, a flicker of something amusement. Pity crossed Mr. Tanaka's face. Julian's blood ran cold. Chloe clapped her hands in excitement. A dinner with the owner? How fabulous. They must be some eccentric billionaire, a Howard Hughes type. Julian stared out at the ocean, the beautiful sunset now looking ominous, like a fire on the water. A dinner. A meeting. The master of the universe was about to meet his maker. The air in the main lodge the next evening was thick with anticipation. Chloe was dressed in a slinky emerald green gown, her excitement palpable. Julian, on the other hand, felt like a man walking to his own execution. He had chosen a simple dark suit, but it felt like a costume, the armor of a man he no longer felt he was. The lodge had been transformed. Dozens of candles cast a flickering, golden glow on the scene. A string quartet played softly in a corner. The few other guests of the resort, who Julian now realized must have been invited specifically for this event, were mingling, glasses of champagne in hand. They were a curated collection of power, a stern-looking German industrialist, a willowy French art dealer, a Silicon Valley venture capitalist he recognized from a magazine cover. Mr. Thorne, Miss Sterling, so glad you could join us. The owner will be down momentarily. As they stepped into the room, Julian felt a dozen pairs of eyes turn toward them. The venture capitalist, a man named Marcus Rove, gave him a curt, almost dismissive nod. The art dealer simply stared at him with an expression of profound pity. It was clear to Julian then that this was not a welcome dinner. It was an audience, and he was the spectacle. Before Julian could answer, the music softened. Mr. Tanaka moved to the center of the room, his voice cutting through the low hum of conversation. All eyes turned toward the grand, sweeping staircase that descended from the second floor. Julian held his breath. He expected to see a reclusive tech billionaire, an Arab sheik, a Russian oligarch. He expected someone who would explain the cigars and the coffee as an eccentric, elaborate display of customer service. He did not expect to see his wife. Elara Vance Thorne descended the staircase, and the world tilted on its axis. She was not the quiet, unassuming woman he had left in San Francisco. She wore a flowing gown of midnight blue silk that draped elegantly over her 4-month baby bump, a detail that was now impossible to miss. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and around her neck was the Van Cleef and Arpels necklace her grandmother had left her, a piece reserved for the most significant of occasions. She moved with a poise and authority he had never seen before. Her expression was calm, her eyes sweeping over the room before they landed with surgical precision on him. There was no pain in her gaze, no anger, just a cold, clear, devastating finality. A roaring sound filled his ears, drowning out the gasp that escaped Chloe's lips beside him. It was a physical shock, like a punch to the gut that stole all the air from his lungs. Every piece of the puzzle slammed into place with brutal clarity. This wasn't a coincidence, this was a statement. This wasn't just her resort, this was a world she had built. Elara reached the bottom of the stairs, and Mr. Tanaka bowed deeply. She gave him a slight, appreciative nod before addressing her guests, her voice as smooth and cool as polished marble. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. She looked around the room, her gaze pointedly skipping over Julian and Chloe. I see some familiar faces. Marcus, it's wonderful to see you outside of a boardroom. Marcus Rove, the venture capitalist, smiled warmly. Elara, the place is magnificent. Your father would be immensely proud. Her father. Julian's mind reeled. Elara's father, Harrison Vance, had been a quiet, formidable man who had passed away 2 years ago. But Alara had always been discreet about the true scale of it. And Julian, in his arrogance, had assumed his new money tech fortune was the dominant force in their marriage. He had seen the Vance family as old, stagnant money. He had been a fool. Finally, Alara's eyes settled on him. "And Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice ringing with crystalline clarity in the silent room. "I see you received my invitation. I do hope your emergency summit in Singapore was productive." Beside him, Chloe looked as if she had seen a ghost. Her face was pale, her mouth slightly agape as she looked from Alara to Julian and back again, the horrifying reality of the situation dawning on her. She wasn't the future Mrs. Thorne. Julian couldn't speak. His throat was closed, his mind a maelstrom of shock and disbelief. He had thought he was the master of his universe, a player moving pieces on a board. But he wasn't even a player. He was the board itself, and his pregnant wife, the woman he had so carelessly underestimated, had just declared checkmate. The dinner was an exercise in exquisite torture. Julian and Chloe were seated at the main table, directly across from Alara. They discussed Vance International's recent acquisition of a hotel chain in Southeast Asia, a new philanthropic initiative in Brazil, and the rising value of their tech portfolio. Julian felt his world shrinking. Vance International wasn't just some dusty old money holding company, it was a dynamic, multi-billion-dollar global behemoth. And Alara, his quiet, art-loving wife, was not just an heiress. She was its chairwoman. Chloe sat in stunned silence, picking at her seared scallops, her face a mask of horrified realization. Chloe Sterling, the rising star of Prometheus Analytics, had been rendered utterly insignificant. He tried to catch Alara's eye, to send some silent, desperate plea, but she was impermeable, engaging her guests, laughing at a joke from Marcus Rove, and discussing the resort's sustainable energy systems with the German industrialist. She was performing the role of gracious host, and in doing so, she was systematically dismantling him piece by piece in front of a jury of his apathetic peers. "If I may have your attention for one final moment," she said. "I have a small piece of business to conclude." She looked directly at Julian, her expression unreadable. "Julian, Mr. Tanaka will show you to the study. We have something to discuss." It was a command, not a request. He rose numbly, his chair scraping against the stone floor. He followed Mr. Tanaka out of the dining hall and down a quiet, candlelit corridor to a large room that served as the resort's office. It was a stark, modern space dominated by a large mahogany desk and a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the moonlit ocean. A few minutes later, Alara entered, closing the door softly behind her. She was no longer the public hostess. The warmth was gone, replaced by a chillingly professional demeanor. "Sit down, Julian," she said, gesturing to one of the chairs opposite the desk. She remained standing. "Don't say anything," she cut him off. "Just listen. You are here for one reason, because I wanted you to be. This island, this resort, this dinner. It was all for you. A going-away party of sorts." "A party?" he asked, bewildered. "A theatrical presentation of facts you have, until now, been conveniently ignorant of," she clarified, her voice sharp. "Fact 2, I have been the acting chairwoman of Vance International since my father's death. I attend quarterly board meetings via video conference from my art studio, the one you thought was my quaint little hobby." She paused, letting the information sink in. Julian felt a wave of nausea. His entire perception of their marriage, of her, was a fiction he had written to suit his own ego. "Fact 3, she continued, her voice dropping to an almost conversational tone that was somehow more terrifying. "I know about Chloe. I've known for 5 months and 22 days. My head of security, a former Mossad agent, is exceptionally thorough. I have transcripts of your texts, recordings of your calls, and a detailed summary of your little strategy sessions." "Please what, Julian?" she shot back, her composure cracking for just a second to reveal the raw pain beneath. Please forgive you. Please pretend that you didn't lie to your pregnant wife and take your assistant to a private island. An island which, in a moment of spectacular poetic justice, I happen to own. She took a deep breath, composing herself again. She walked over to the desk and picked up a slim leather-bound folder. She slid it across the polished surface toward him. Which brings us to our final and most important fact. This is why you're really here. Inside were financial documents, profit and loss statements, and internal memos. They were from his company, Prometheus Analytics. The bottom line was terrifying. Prometheus was bleeding money. It was leveraged to the hilt, and the apex deal he had been so proud of wasn't a victory lap, it was a desperate, last-ditch effort to stay solvent. How? How did you get this? He whispered, his hands trembling. Marcus Rove, she said simply. The venture capitalist you saw at dinner. His firm is one of your primary investors, and he is an old friend of my father's who sits on my advisory board. He's been concerned about your aggressive growth strategy for months. He brought these to me last week. She let the silence hang in the air, a heavy, suffocating blanket. She had seen through all of it, his lies, his posturing, his secret, desperate gamble. She had seen him more clearly than he had ever seen himself. So, this is my offer, she said, her voice now devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of a CEO making a deal. Vance International will acquire a controlling interest in Prometheus Analytics. We will inject the necessary capital to save it. We will absorb your debt. Your company will survive. A flicker of hope ignited in his chest. Elara, thank you. She slid a second set of papers across the desk. Divorce papers. This is everything you've worked for, Julian, she said, her voice softening with a terrible, final pity. He stared at the papers, his signature line waiting. He had walked into paradise as a king. He was now being asked to sign his own abdication, orchestrated by the one person in the world he had been arrogant enough to believe he had completely under his control. While Julian was being systematically dismantled in the study, Chloe Sterling was trapped in her own personal hell at the dinner table. The future she had so vividly imagined, weekends in the Hamptons, a seat on the board, the envy of everyone she knew had evaporated like a mirage. The other guests had long since moved on to other topics, leaving her socially stranded. She felt their judgmental eyes on her, branding her with the scarlet letter of Mistress. She was no longer a brilliant VP or a desirable woman, she was a cliché, a homewrecker, and worst of all, a fool who had hitched her wagon to a falling star. Her anger, at first directed at Elara for this public humiliation, quickly curdled and turned toward Julian. He hadn't just lied to his wife, he had lied to her. He had presented himself as an all-powerful master of the universe with a meek, docile wife in the background. He had made Chloe feel like his partner in a conquest, when in reality, she was just a sordid little secret he couldn't even manage to keep. What was her next move? Should she pack her bags? Should she confront Julian? He held a sheaf of papers in his hand. The divorce settlement. Julian turned slowly. His face was ashen, his eyes hollow. The confident, charismatic man she had fallen for was gone, replaced by this ghost. What's over? She demanded, her voice rising with panic. What did she do? What did you agree to? He explained the terms of Elara's offer, the hostile takeover disguised as a rescue, his removal as CEO, the ironclad divorce agreement. As he spoke, Chloe's panic morphed into pure, unadulterated rage. You're just going to let her do this? She shrieked. You're going to give away your company, the one you built, for $1. Have you lost your mind? No, she doesn't, Chloe shot back, her ambition flaring back to life, fueled by desperation. You have me. We can fight her. We can expose her for the manipulative shrew she is. We can go to the press. Power-crazed billionaire heiress tries to destroy self-made husband. We can create a narrative. But now it looked ugly, parasitic. He realized in that moment that she had never loved him. She had loved his power, his status, his company, and now that it was all slipping away, she was terrified of losing her investment. A narrative, he repeated, a bitter, hollow laugh escaping his lips. Chloe, you don't get it. This isn't a PR battle. This is a war, and I've already lost. She controls the board, the investors, the media. Her father was a legend. She's his daughter. I'm just some tech bro who cheated on his pregnant wife. Who do you think the world is going to side with? What about me, Julian? What about everything you promised me? A board seat, a partnership, our future. There is no us, he said, the finality in his voice chilling her to the bone. There was never going to be an US. I was using you for an ego boost, and you were using me as a shortcut up the corporate ladder. Let's not pretend this was some great romance. She was just another casualty in the blast radius of his implosion. Her fury gave way to a desperate, last-ditch gambit. She decided to appeal to Elara, woman to woman. Surely the pregnant, abandoned wife would have some sympathy. Perhaps she could negotiate a severance package, a quiet exit with her reputation and finances intact. The next morning, she found Elara walking on the beach near the main lodge. She was alone, a serene figure against the backdrop of the rising sun. Mrs. Thorne, Chloe began, her voice trembling slightly. Elara, can I speak with you for a moment? Elara stopped and turned, her expression unreadable. She didn't invite Chloe to speak, she simply waited. I want you to know how sorry I am, Chloe stammered, the practiced words feeling hollow and absurd. Elara listened patiently until Chloe finished, her eyes fixed on Chloe's face. Are you finished? Elara asked, her voice quiet. Yes. I just thought you should know. I'm not a bad person. Elara gave a small, humorless smile. Ms. Sterling, let me be very clear so that we don't have to have another conversation. I do not think about you at all. You are a symptom of my husband's weakness, not the cause of it. You are a line item in a long list of his moral and financial failures. Your apology is irrelevant, and your personal character is of no interest to me. Chloe felt her face flush with shame. As for your professional future, Elara continued, as if discussing a weather report, your employment at Prometheus Analytics is terminated, effective immediately, for gross misconduct. My legal team has drawn up a non-disclosure agreement. It's quite comprehensive. If you sign it, you will receive a standard 2-month severance. If you refuse, or if you ever speak of me, my husband, or this company to anyone, I will ensure that not only will you never work in the tech industry again, but your name will be so thoroughly tarnished that you won't be able to get a job managing a Starbucks. Mr. Tanaka has the paperwork. A boat is waiting to take you to the airstrip. You have 1 hour. She was no longer a player in the game. As the small boat carrying Chloe disappeared over the horizon, a different kind of darkness began to gather. The wind picked up, whipping the palm trees into a frenzy and churning the placid turquoise water into a turbulent slate gray. A tropical storm, which had been a distant threat on the weather charts, had unexpectedly changed course and intensified. It was heading directly for them. Mr. Tanaka and his staff moved with quiet efficiency, securing the villas, battening down hatches, and guiding the few remaining guests to the main lodge, which doubled as a reinforced storm shelter. He had no one to shelter with. The storm hit with biblical fury. The power flickered and died, plunging the villa into a disorienting darkness, illuminated only by intermittent flashes of lightning that lit up the raging sea outside. Julian sat there in the dark, a bottle of absurdly expensive whiskey in his hand, listening to the sound of his world being torn apart, both literally and metaphorically. In the roaring darkness, there were no distractions, no deals to be made, no one to impress. There was only the raw, unfiltered truth of who he was, a cheat, a liar, and a failure who had spectacularly underestimated the woman who was carrying his child. Suddenly, a frantic banging on his door cut through the roar of the wind. He stumbled to open it. It was Mr. Tanaka, his calm demeanor shattered, his face etched with worry. "Mr. Thorne, you must come to the lodge immediately. It's Mrs. Thorne." The stress, the rapid drop in barometric pressure. "She's having complications. The doctor we have on staff says it's serious. Premature contractions. We need to get her to a hospital in Nassau, but the storm has grounded all flights and boats. We can't get her out." A jolt of pure, primal fear, sharper than anything he had felt before, cut through Julian's self-pity. His child. Their child. He followed Tanaka, battling the wind and rain to the main lodge. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Elara was in a private suite upstairs, and the resort's doctor, a young American, was with her. Marcus Rove and the other guests were huddled in the main area, their faces grim. Julian rushed up the stairs and found the doctor just outside her room. This was his fault. The stress he had put her through, this elaborate, cruel piece of theater she had constructed to confront him, it had all taken a toll. He had pushed her to this. He pushed past the doctor and entered the room. Elara was lying in bed, her face pale and beaded with sweat. She looked up and saw him, and for the first time, her mask of cold control was gone. "Julian," she whispered, her voice weak. He rushed to her side, taking her hand. It was cold and clammy. "The baby," she choked out, a tear rolling down her temple. "It's too soon. The money, the company, the affair, the lies, all that mattered was the woman in the bed and the tiny, fragile life inside her that they had created together." He saw not the formidable chairwoman of Vance International, but the woman he had once loved, the woman who had painstakingly glued together a shattered vase he'd broken, the woman who would hum softly while she read. "It's going to be okay," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he didn't know he still possessed. "We're going to be okay. I promise." He sat with her for hours as the storm raged outside, holding her hand, murmuring words of comfort, fetching her water, and talking to their unborn child through her belly, telling it to be strong, to wait. He felt the full, crushing weight of his betrayal, not as a strategic loss, but as a profound human failure. He had broken something far more precious than a business deal. He had endangered the two most important people in his life. As dawn broke, the storm began to subside. The wind died down to a mournful sigh, and the rain softened. A weak, watery light filtered through the windows. The doctor came in to check on Elara. He took her blood pressure, listened to the baby's heartbeat, and a slow smile spread across his face. Elara sobbed with relief, and Julian found himself choking back tears of his own. He looked at his wife, her hand still clutching his, and felt a chasm of regret so deep it threatened to swallow him whole. The helicopter arrived 2 hours after the storm cleared, its blades whipping up sea spray as it landed on the resort's helipad. Elara, though weak, was stable enough to be transported to a state-of-the-art hospital in Nassau for observation. She was carried on a stretcher with Julian walking beside her, never letting go of her hand. "She's a remarkable woman," Marcus said quietly. "Stronger than her father in some ways. I hope, for the child's sake, you realize what you've thrown away." Julian could only nod, the words caught in his throat. They flew in silence, the noise of the helicopter a barrier between them. Elara seemed to be sleeping, her face still pale. Julian watched her, memorizing the lines of her profile, the gentle curve of her pregnant belly. He had taken this for granted, this woman, this life. He had treated her love like a stock option he could cash in at his convenience, and he had learned in the most brutal way possible that it was a priceless, non-renewable resource. Once she was settled, a nurse politely but firmly told Julian that Mrs. Thorne needed to rest and that visiting hours were over. He understood. The brief truce forged in the crucible of the storm was over. Reality was reasserting itself. He found Mr. Tanaka waiting for him in the hospital lobby. The serene manager looked tired, but his composure was back in place. He handed Julian a plane ticket. "This is a commercial flight back to San Francisco, Mr. Thorne. It leaves in 3 hours," Tanaka said. "Mrs. Thorne's lawyers will be in touch with yours to finalize the paperwork. All of your belongings from the villa have been packed and will be shipped to a storage unit. Your home in Pacific Heights is being put on the market." The efficiency was breathtaking. "Tanaka," Julian said, his voice raw. "I will pass along the message, sir," Tanaka said with a slight bow. And then he was gone. He was no longer in a private jet sipping champagne. He was in a middle seat in Economy Plus, a stranger's elbow digging into his ribs, the reality of his new, diminished life starkly clear. He was a man with a minority share in a company he no longer controlled, soon to be divorced from the woman he had wronged, and a father to a child he might barely get to know. Months passed. The divorce was finalized with quiet, ruthless speed. The sale of Prometheus Analytics to Vance International was announced in the financial press, framed as a strategic partnership. It was a clean, professional narrative that erased all the drama, all the betrayal. Elara had given him that one last gift, she had allowed him to keep a shred of his public dignity. He moved into a small, soulless apartment downtown. He watched from the sidelines as a new management team expertly righted his company, trimming the fat, cutting his reckless projects, and setting it on a path to stable, long-term growth. Then one day in late autumn, he received a single, formal email from Elara's assistant. It contained a photograph. A beautiful, healthy baby girl, wrapped in a soft pink blanket, with a shock of dark hair and Elara's deep, intelligent eyes. He wept for the man he had failed to be, for the wife he had lost, and for the father he now had to learn how to become from a distance, one carefully supervised visit at a time. His empire was gone. His paradise was a memory of shame. The years that followed were not a fairy tale of instant forgiveness, but a quiet, steady journey of atonement. Julian disappeared from the financial world, taking a simple job managing a small nonprofit that taught coding to underprivileged kids. He poured the same energy he'd once used for hostile takeovers into securing grants and changing lives. He never missed a supervised visit with Hope. He was there for every scraped knee, every school play, every bedtime story he was allowed to read. He never asked Elara for anything, he never made excuses for his past, he simply showed up, consistently and humbly, for their daughter. One cool Saturday afternoon, nearly 5 years later, he was in the park with Hope, pushing her on the swings. He looked up and saw Elara standing nearby, watching them. For the first time in years, the cold, professional mask was gone. She gave him a small, gentle smile. "I'm the lucky one," Julian replied, his heart full. He had lost his kingdom, but in the process, he had finally found his soul. Julian Thorne's story is a powerful cautionary tale about the true cost of arrogance and betrayal. He thought he had the world at his fingertips, but he failed to see the incredible power and strength in the person closest to him. Elara Vance Thorne, underestimated and betrayed, didn't just get revenge. She rose from the ashes of her husband's deceit to protect her legacy and her child, proving that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. If this story of karma, empowerment, and the shocking downfall of a millionaire resonated with you, please hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who loves a story of epic justice. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another one of our unforgettable dramas.